You doubted something you remembered today. And for a moment, you weren't sure if you could trust your own mind. Memory research has been finding the same thing for decades. The brain does not record the past. It reconstructs it every single time you reach for it. The question worth sitting with tonight is not whether your memories are accurate. It is why the brain, the most sophisticated system ever studied, would build something it knows is partly constructed. The part that quietly unsettles. The memories that feel most certain are often the ones most carefully rebuilt. A mind that edits its own history to protect you is not a broken mind. That is a question that takes 100 facts to answer. Welcome to Sleepy Science Facts. What protects you is not always what is true. Let your breath slow. You are resting in the only mind that has ever known you, one that edits gently and softens what remains. And now we begin. Memory has long been compared to a filing cabinet, a system that stores experiences and retrieves them intact on demand. For most of the 20th century, this was the dominant model in psychology. Scientists believed that once an experience was encoded, it stayed essentially unchanged in long-term storage. The brain, in this view, was a biological hard drive. You put something in, it stayed there. You retrieved it. But beginning in the 1970s, psychologist Elizabeth Loftus began a series of experiments that would quietly dismantle this idea. She found that human memory was not fixed, not passive, and not reliable in the way everyone assumed. She found it was something stranger and, in many ways, more interesting. Memory, it turned out, was alive. In one of Loftus's early experiments, participants watched a film of a car accident and then answered questions about what they had seen. When asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, participants reported significantly higher speeds than those asked. How fast were the cars going when they hit each other? The word smashed changed the memory. Not just the recall, the memory itself. Participants who heard smashed were also more likely to later report seeing broken glass in the film, even though there was none. A single word, inserted after the event, had quietly altered what people believed they had witnessed. This phenomenon, where information received after an event gets incorporated into the memory of that event, is called the misinformation effect. It is not a sign of weakness or gullibility. Researchers have found it in people of all ages, all intelligence levels, and all levels of confidence in their memories. The effect is stronger under certain conditions, when there is a delay between the event and the questioning, when the misinformation is delivered by a trusted source, and when the original memory was formed under stress or distraction. Each of these conditions describes a large proportion of the memories we form during ordinary life. The brain does not store memories the way a camera stores photographs. When you experience something, the brain encodes certain features: emotional tone, sensory detail, contextual quiz, and distributes them across different regions. The hippocampus plays a key role in forming and indexing new episodic memories, while the amygdala encodes emotional significance. The prefrontal cortex helps organize and narrate the experience. What you call a memory is actually a reconstruction assembled from these distributed pieces each time you recall it. The act of remembering is not retrieval, it is recreation. And every recreation carries the possibility of small changes. Sleep is not passive rest for memory. During sleep, particularly during slow wave and REM stages, the brain is actively consolidating the day's experiences. The hippocampus replays recent events, coordinating with the cortex to transfer information into longer-term storage. This process, called memory consolidation, has been studied extensively since the late 1990s. Researchers found that people who slept after learning a task performed significantly better on it the next day than people who stayed awake. Sleep was not just preserving memories, it was strengthening them, sorting them, integrating them with older knowledge, and in some cases, quietly changing them. The question of why sleep sometimes produces false memories is connected to what the brain is doing during consolidation. When memories are replayed in the hippocampus during sleep, they are not played back like recordings. They are reconstructed, and that reconstruction happens in a context filled with emotional associations, prior knowledge, and ongoing biological processes. Researchers have found that during REM sleep, the brain is particularly active in areas associated with emotional processing and pattern recognition. It is, in a sense, looking for meaning, connecting the new to the old, finding patterns, building narratives. And narratives require editing. One of the most carefully studied aspects of false memory formation is the DRM paradigm, named for researchers Dees, Rudiger, and McDermott. In this procedure, participants are given lists of words that all relate to a central concept: bill, rest, tired, dream, night. But the central word itself is never presented. When tested later, participants consistently and confidently recall the central word as part of the list, their brains filled in the obvious missing piece. The false memory was not a mistake of attention. It was the system working exactly as designed, inferring from patterns, completing what was implied. The DRM effect is not weakened by intelligence. In studies comparing participants across educational backgrounds, the false recall rate remained largely consistent. It was not weakened by motivation to be accurate. Even when participants were explicitly warned that some words had not been presented and were offered financial incentives for accurate recall, the false memories persisted at similar rates. What the experiments revealed was not a flaw in human cognition, but a feature. The brain is not a recording device, trying and failing. It is a pattern completion engine that occasionally completes patterns that were never fully there. The mechanism is ancient, and it runs deeper than intention or alertness can reach. False memories are not random. They follow predictable rules. They tend to be semantically related to real events, plausible extensions of what actually happened. They tend to preserve the emotional tone of the original experience quite faithfully, and they tend to feel, to the person holding them, completely indistinguishable from real memories. In brain imaging studies, The neural signatures of true and false memories are remarkably similar. The same hippocampal and prefrontal regions activate for both. The same sense of familiarity and conviction accompanies both. The brain does not tag its reconstructions as reconstructions. It presents them with equal confidence. This is the point at which memory science begins to shift from unsettling to quietly revelatory. If the brain cannot reliably distinguish its own reconstructions from its recordings, if false memories feel as real as true ones, activate the same systems, and carry the same emotional weight, then the brain is not making an error when it creates them. It is doing something it was built to do. The question researchers began asking, in laboratories from Boston to Amsterdam, was not, how do we stop false memories, but something more fundamental. What purpose do they serve? What is the mind protecting by building them? That is the question these facts follow. One answer came from studying what happens when the memory system is damaged. Patients with certain forms of amnesia, particularly those with damage to the hippocampus, lose the ability to form new episodic memories. But some also show a pattern called confabulation. They fill in gaps in their memory with invented content, sincerely believing it to be true. They are not lying. They are not aware of the gaps. The brain, unable to retrieve actual memories, generates plausible substitutes. Confabulation reveals something foundational. The need to have a continuous, coherent personal narrative may be more fundamental to the brain than the accuracy of that narrative. Confabulation is not limited to patients with brain damage. Researchers studying healthy adults have found what they call everyday confabulation, the tendency to fill in gaps in memory with plausible, consistent-sounding details that may or may not have actually occurred. When people recount stories from their past, they consistently add details they could not have directly observed, smooth over inconsistencies, and introduce narrative logic that the original experience may not have carried. The brain is, in a very real sense, a storyteller. It does not merely recall, it narrates, shapes, and arranges. And narration always requires a degree of coherence that raw experience rarely provides. The function of memory in human psychology is not primarily archival. We do not remember the past in order to store it accurately. We remember it in order to use it, to guide future behavior, regulate emotion, and maintain a stable sense of self. Researchers studying the relationship between memory and identity have found that autobiographical memory is deeply selective. The brain does not try to remember everything. It selects, emphasizes, and subtly edits what it stores in ways that tend to support a coherent self-narrative. False memories, in this light, may be understood as a continuation of that editorial function, not failure, but purpose. In 2007, neuroscientist Donna Bridge and colleagues published research showing that the act of remembering a memory makes it temporarily unstable and vulnerable to change, a process called reconsolidation. When a memory is recalled, it briefly re-enters an active state and must be restored. During this window, the memory can be modified by new information, emotions, or even the physical state of the brain at the time of recall. Each time you remember something, you are not just retrieving it. You are potentially updating it. The version of the memory you store after each retrieval may be slightly different from the one before. Reconsolidation has significant implications for understanding why memories change over time. It means that the very act of remembering something beloved makes it vulnerable to the emotions of the present moment. A memory you revisit during a period of sadness may become slightly tinged with that sadness. A memory you return to during a time of warmth may become warmer than it was. Researchers have found that reconsolidation can shift not just the emotional tone of memories, but their factual content, particularly in memories involving other people, where social and relational context is always present at the time of recall. The past is always arriving through the present. Sleep plays a specific role in reconsolidation. After a memory is destabilized during waking recall, the subsequent period of sleep appears to be essential for its restabilization. Studies using sleep deprivation after memory retrieval have found that the reconsolidation process is disrupted. Memories become less stable, more susceptible to interference. This suggests that some of the memory processing that happens during sleep is specifically related to re-encoding memories that have been recently recalled, incorporating the small updates that reconsolidation allows. Sleep, in this view, is not just the time when memories form. It is also the time when they are quietly revised. The revisions that occur during sleep are not random. Research by Matthew Walker and colleagues at UW.org. C. Berkeley has found that REM sleep in particular appears to be involved in processing the emotional content of memories. During REM sleep, levels of the stress hormone norepinephrine drop to their lowest point in the entire sleep-wake cycle. Walker has proposed that this neurochemical context, high dream activity, high emotional processing, low stress chemistry, allows the brain to replay emotionally charged memories in a state where their emotional charge can be gradually reduced. The memory of an upsetting event, replayed in REM sleep, becomes slightly less distressing with each pass. This model, that REM sleep functions as a kind of overnight emotional therapy, has received support from multiple directions. Studies of people with post-traumatic stress disorder show abnormal REM sleep patterns, including disrupted norepinephrine suppression during the REM stage. This disruption may help explain why traumatic memories in PTSD retain their emotional intensity instead of gradually fading as ordinary memories do. The brain, unable to process the memory in the usual low-stress REM context, cannot complete the emotional editing process. The memory stays sharp, rough, and fully charged. The therapeutic function of sleep has been interrupted, and the past remains unprocessed. If REM sleep can reduce the emotional intensity of real memories, it raises a question about what else it might be doing to their content. Reducing the emotional charge of a memory may involve more than simply replaying it. It may involve adjusting the narrative around it. Researchers studying emotional memory consolidation have found evidence that sleep is associated with shifts in how autobiographical events are framed. What is emphasized? What is minimized? What connections to prior experience are strengthened? These are, in the most precise sense, small editorial changes to memory, They are changes that serve a function, and they may, in some cases, produce memories that differ from the original event. The brain's role as emotional editor is not a byproduct of processing errors. It appears to be a deliberate feature. Studies of emotional memory bias, the tendency for memories of the past to become slightly more positive over time, have found that this shift is strongest in people who sleep well and weakest in people with sleep disorders. The brain, given the opportunity to process emotional memories during healthy sleep, tends to soften their edges. What was experienced as painful becomes, in memory, less sharp. What was experienced as frightening becomes, over many sleeps, more manageable. This softening is not delusion. It may be what makes it possible to continue. Researchers call this the fading affect bias, the tendency for negative emotions associated with memories to fade faster than positive emotions over time. It is one of the most counterintuitive and replicated findings in memory science, documented across cultures and age groups. The brain is not trying to create an accurate historical record. It is trying to maintain a functional organism, an organism that remained in full contact with the complete emotional intensity of every difficult experience it had ever had, would struggle to continue moving through the world. The fading affect bias is, in this sense, a form of psychological immunity, built-in, automatics, and quietly operating every night. False memories may function as an extension of this same immune system. When the brain creates a slightly different version of a difficult event, one that includes more supportive details, a clearer narrative arc, or a less overwhelming emotional core, it may be doing deliberately what the fading affect bias does gradually. It is constructing a version of the past that the person can actually carry. Researchers studying trauma survivors have found that those who form coherent, narratively integrated memories of their experiences, even memories that differ in some details from objective accounts, tend to show better psychological recovery than those whose memories remain fragmented and unintegrated. The relationship between narrative coherence and psychological health is now well established in clinical psychology. Therapies, including cognitive behavioral therapy and narrative therapy, explicitly work to help patients construct more coherent, less overwhelming accounts of difficult experiences. The goal is not necessarily to recover every accurate detail. It is to build a story the patient can hold without being overwhelmed by the weight of it. This is, in many ways, precisely what the sleeping brain does quietly on its own, every night, without instruction or conscious direction. It finds the available narrative. It smooths what it is able to smooth. It edits consistently towards survival. Not all false memories are protective. Some false memories are harmful. They distort relationships, create unjustified fears, or misplace blame for something that did not occur as remembered. The memory system is powerful and not always wise in its editing. The same processes that soften painful memories can, under certain conditions, amplify fears or create inaccurate beliefs about others. Understanding the mechanics of false memory is not the same as endorsing everything the system produces. It is, rather, a beginning, a recognition that the brain's relationship with truth is more complex, more purposeful, and more compassionate toward its own survival than anyone suspected 50 years ago. 25 facts in, and the question we began with has quietly changed shape. We asked why the subconscious creates false memories during sleep, expecting the answer to be a glitch, a failure, a flaw in an otherwise reliable system. What the science has been showing is something different. The brain creates false memories because accuracy is not its primary value. Coherence is. Survival is. The emotional continuity of a self that can keep moving forward. The next arc follows what happens when this system meets experiences that are too large for simple softening, and what the brain chooses to do when the story it needs to tell is not the one that happened. That is where the next arc begins. Right now, somewhere in your sleeping brain, memories from today are being sorted. Some are being replayed. Some are being quietly edited. The process that just opened, about what happens when the softening isn't enough. When the brain encounters something it cannot simply reduce, is already running in the chemistry you are moving toward tonight. The brain does not wait for permission to begin its work. As your breathing slows, as the thoughts thin at their edges, the sorting has already started. You don't need to direct it. The system already knows where to go. Now, we continue. The brain does not treat all memories equally during sleep. Emotional memories receive preferential consolidation. They are replayed more frequently, processed more deeply, and integrated more thoroughly into long-term storage than neutral memories. This prioritization makes evolutionary sense. Events that carried strong emotions were likely significant for survival. But it also means the brain is investing its most significant overnight processing resources in the memories that most need editing. The events that hurt the most are the ones most actively worked on while you sleep. Research from multiple sleep labs has confirmed this emotional prioritization holds across age groups, culture, and sleep architectures, from childhood through late adulthood. During slow-wave sleep, the hippocampus replays the day's experiences in compressed form, coordinating with the neocortex to begin the transfer of episodic memories into longer-term storage. This process, called hippocampal neocortical dialogue, was first observed in rats in the 1990s and has since been documented in humans through functional imaging. What researchers found, somewhat unexpectedly, was that the replays are not faithful copies. They are schematized. The brain replays the gist, the emotional core, the relational pattern, rather than every specific detail of an experience. Precision is gradually filtered out across this process. Meaning is what is retained. The filtering of precision during sleep consolidation is selective. Researchers have found that peripheral details of an experience are more likely to be lost or altered during sleep consolidation than central features. In emotional events, central is defined largely by emotional salience. The details that carry the most feeling are preserved most accurately. Peripheral details, the color of a wall, the exact words in a less emotionally charged exchange, are more vulnerable to distortion or loss. This selectivity means that memories of emotional events tend to remain accurate at their core. while becoming increasingly reconstructed at their edges over time. The brain's preference for emotional salience over peripheral accuracy creates a specific kind of memory distortion. When we remember important events, we tend to remember the emotional truth, what it felt like, what mattered, more accurately than the factual record. Studies comparing people's memories of significant personal events with contemporaneous diary entries have found consistent patterns. The emotional essence is usually recalled accurately, while specific details drift over time. The feeling of the memory stays. The scaffolding around it shifts. What remains is not less real for being reconstructed. In many cases, it is more true to what the experience meant. This emotional fidelity is not simply a bias. It reflects what the brain is optimized to do. From an evolutionary standpoint, knowing exactly what color shirt someone was wearing when they behaved dangerously is far less important than remembering that the encounter was dangerous. The brain is extracting signal from experience, emotional signal, and encoding that with high fidelity while allowing the noise, the peripheral detail, to degrade. False memories that form around the periphery of emotionally significant events are not corrupting the memory. They are filling in the parts the brain deemed non-essential with plausible material drawn from context. The source monitoring framework, developed by Marsha Johnson and colleagues in the 1990s, describes the brain's process for determining where memories came from. When you remember something, you don't just remember the content, you also remember or infer the source. Did this happen? Or did I imagine it? Did I experience this? Or hear someone describe it? Did I dream this? Or live it? This source monitoring process relies on evaluating the quality and character of the memory, its perceptual detail, its émotionnelle association, its contextual embedding. When source monitoring fails, or when two sources produce memories of similar quality, false memories can result. Sleep is a particularly fertile ground for source monitoring errors. During REM sleep, internally generated experience, dreaming, produces memories that share many characteristics with real experiences. Perceptual vividness, emotional intensity, narrative structure. When these dream memories are consolidated alongside waking memories, the brain's source monitoring system must distinguish between them. Researchers have found that this distinction is not always successful. Elements of dreams can become integrated into autobiographical memory, and real events can take on the quality of dreams. The border between what happened and what was experienced inwardly is, during sleep processing, genuinely porous. The porousness is not a malfunction. It is the price of the brain's extraordinary capacity to generate experience from the inside. The porousness of that border has been documented in laboratory studies. Participants who were given word lists before sleep and then tested after sleep showed higher rates of false recall for D, RM type words, semantically related words that weren't on the original list, than participants tested after equivalent time awake, sleep, rather than protecting memory accuracy, increased the rate of certain kinds of false memory formation. The interpretation that researchers settled on was not that sleep was distorting memory, but that sleep was completing it. integrating the presented words into broader semantic networks, which then contributed material to the reconstructed memory. The brain was finishing what the day began. Pattern completion during sleep is not a bug. It is one of the things sleep is specifically for. The hippocampus, during slow-wave sleep, repeatedly replays compressed versions of recent experiences, and these replays gradually train the cortex to recognize the patterns they represent. Over many replays, the cortex builds a generalized schema, a kind of average or essence of the category of experience. This schema can then fill in missing details when memory is tested. The false detail the brain supplies is often not random. It is what would typically have been there. Given the pattern, the brain is generating statistically reasonable completion. The concept of schema-guided completion helps explain a long-standing puzzle in memory science. Why people with better general knowledge and more extensive semantic networks tend to show higher rates of certain kinds of false memories. Their richer schemas provide more material for completion. A person who knows a great deal about how conversations typically unfold will generate more plausible sounding false details about a specific, remembered conversation than someone with less experience. Knowledge does not protect against false memory. In some domains, it enriches it. The more you know about how the world works, the more the brain has to work with when it builds. Imagination inflation is a related phenomenon. The more often you imagine something happening, the more likely you are to later remember it as having actually happened. In a series of studies, participants asked to imagine childhood events they had not experienced showed significantly higher rates of remembering those events as real in follow-up interviews conducted weeks later. The act of imagining created a memory trace. When that trace was later encountered during retrieval, the brain recognized it as familiar and, without a reliable source tag, attributed it to experience rather than imagination. The memory had been created from the inside. Imagination inflation has been observed to be enhanced by sleep. Memories of imagined events, like memories of real events, benefit from consolidation. When imagination is vivid and emotionally engaging, conditions that produce stronger memory traces, the likelihood of later misattribution increases. This means that the imagination you engage in during the twilight state before sleep, or the imagery you construct during hypnagogic, half-dreaming, may be processed by the consolidating brain with the same weight as waking experience. The brain does not reliably separate what it lived from what it constructed while drifting into sleep. Whatever the mind generates in those drifting moments may be carried forward as experience, indistinguishable from what the day actually provided. The emotional context of memory formation profoundly affects its accuracy and its vulnerability to distortion. Memories formed during periods of stress are encoded differently than memories formed during calm. High stress activates the amygdala strongly, which enhances encoding of the central, emotionally salient aspects of the experience, while impairing encoding of peripheral details, a phenomenon called the weapon focus effect in eyewitness research. Paradoxically, these stress-encoded memories feel more vivid and certain while being less accurate in their peripheral details. The certainty is a feature of emotional intensity, not a feature of accuracy. The feeling of knowing does not tell you what you actually know. This dissociation, high certainty, variable accuracy, is one of the most counterintuitive and replicated findings in memory science. People are generally poor judges of whether their memories are accurate. Confidence does not predict accuracy. In studies of eyewitness testimony, confident witnesses are not more accurate than uncertain ones. The feeling of knowing, the sense of vividness, the experience of remembering clearly, these are not reliable guides to whether the memory reflects what actually happened. They reflect how well the memory trace was consolidated, which is influenced by emotion, sleep, and subsequent recall, not by how carefully the original event was observed. The brain, it has become increasingly clear, did not evolve to produce an accurate historical record of your life. It evolved to produce a functional, emotionally coherent narrative that supports ongoing adaptation to a world that keeps changing. False memories are not the exception in this system. They are, in some sense, the whole point. The reconstruction, the editing, the pattern completion, the schema-guided filling, these are the mechanisms by which experience is transformed into usable knowledge and manageable history. What the next arc follows is the question of what happens when that mechanism meets experiences that refuse to be made manageable. That is the question the second half follows. You've been listening for a while now, still with these thoughts. Take a quiet breath. Notice that the mind exploring these ideas is the same mind that edits its own history every night. That does what it must to keep you moving forward. We're tracing the architecture of the brain's own compassion together, in the dark, and we'll keep going, gently. Some experiences are too large for ordinary consolidation. Trauma, intense, overwhelming, often involving threat to life or fundamental safety, produces a category of memory that behaves differently from ordinary experience. Traumatic memories often lack the narrative integration of ordinary memories. They exist, in many survivors' accounts, as fragments, sensory impressions, emotions, bodily sensations, without the connecting tissue of story. The hippocampal narrative function, the part that normally situates experience in time, place, and causal sequence, is often disrupted by extreme stress. What is encoded is intense but disorganized. The experience is present without being placed anywhere. The disorganization of traumatic memory is not a failure. It is, researchers now believe, a feature of how the brain handles threat that exceeds its processing capacity. Under conditions of extreme stress, the amygdala, which registers emotional significance and drives survival responses, dominates brain function. The prefrontal cortex, which normally provides context and narrative, is suppressed. The hippocampus continues to encode, but in a context where the organizing narrative system is offline. The result is a memory of high emotional intensity and perceptual vividness, without the temporal and contextual scaffolding that ordinary memories carry. The brain recorded the feeling. The story would have to come later. The fragmented quality of traumatic memory has implications for how the brain attempts to process it during sleep. The normal consolidation process, in which hippocampal replays gradually transfer episodic memories to cortical storage, works most smoothly when memories carry a clear narrative structure with beginning, middle, and end. When memories are fragmented and structureless, the consolidation process becomes more effortful. Researchers studying sleep in trauma survivors have found disrupted slow-wave sleep architecture and altered hippocampal replay patterns. The system is working, but the material it is trying to process is resisting the usual form of narrative completion. In response to this resistance, the brain may construct, rather than consolidating a traumatic memory as it was encoded, fragmented, structureless. The brain may fill in missing connective tissue with plausible material. It may construct a version of events that has the narrative coherence the original lacked. This constructed version may differ from what actually occurred, but it may also be the only version the brain can successfully consolidate. In some cases, what emerges from repeated overnight processing is not a false memory in the ordinary sense. It is a built memory, a memory that was partly created to survive. The built memory is not random fiction. It is constrained by the real fragments it surrounds. Researchers studying trauma memory have found that even when specific details are inaccurate, the emotional truth and the relational dynamics of the original event are usually preserved. What changes is the periphery, the specific words, the exact sequence, the precise location. What stays is the core emotional reality. Who was safe? Who was threatening? What was lost? What was survived? The brain's editorial function is, in this context, trying to preserve what matters most while finding a form that can be carried without shattering. The psychological concept of narrative identity, developed by theorist Dan McAdams, holds that identity is not a fixed essence, but an ongoing story. We know who we are because we have a story about where we came from, what we have done, and what we are becoming. Memory is the raw material of that story. When memories are fragmented or inaccessible, the sense of identity becomes unstable. When the brain fills in narrative gaps, even with material that is partly constructed, it may be doing so in service of the coherence that identity requires. False memories, in this framing, are not lies the brain tells. They are structure it provides. The therapeutic implications of this understanding have been developing for decades. Trauma-focused therapies increasingly emphasize narrative integration, the process of helping patients construct a coherent, tellable account of their experience. The goal is not necessarily to recover every accurate detail. It is to build a story that has a beginning, middle, and end. A story in which the self is an agent, not merely a victim. This therapeutic construction is understood to be, in part, a conscious participation in the process the brain performs unconsciously during sleep. The building of a survivable narrative from difficult material. The therapist and the sleeping brain are, in this sense, working toward the same thing. The brain's construction of protective narrative is not limited to trauma. In ordinary life, the mind regularly edits memory in ways that serve the self's continuity. Studies of self-serving memory bias have found that people consistently remember their past behavior as more consistent with their current values than it actually was. They remember being kinder than contemporaneous accounts suggest, more principled, more prescient. They remember relationships as more harmonious than recorded evidence indicates. These edits are not conscious lies. They are the brain maintaining a self-concept it can inhabit, a story of self it can continue to build upon. Self-serving memory bias increases with emotional investment in the self-concept being protected. The more important a particular identity, as a good parent, a fair colleague, a loyal friend, the more the brain tends to edit memories in ways that confirm it. This is not simple denial. It is active reconstruction, and it serves a function. People who maintain more positive self-narratives, even narratives that are somewhat idealized, tend to show better psychological adjustment, more resilience, and more pro-social behavior than those who maintain highly self-critical or fragmented self-narratives. The edited story is not without cost, but the alternative may be more costly still. At this point in the journey, the question has turned inside out. We began by asking why the brain creates false memories, expecting a story about malfunction. What the science has been showing is a story about design. The brain does not value accuracy above all else. It values coherence, continuity, and the emotional survival of the self it carries. False memories are the instruments of that survival. They smooth the unbearable, complete the fragmentary, maintain the narrative that allows a person to keep moving. The question the second half follows is the one beneath all of this. Who are you? If the story you carry was partly built, what just opened? The question of what it means to be a self whose memories were partly constructed for your own protection is not only a neuroscience question. You may be carrying that already. A version of your own story that you've told enough times, you're no longer sure which parts you witnessed and which parts the night gave you. That's not a flaw. That may be the thing that kept you here. Notice your breath. It has been continuing this whole time without requiring you to manage it. Now we continue. The self that emerges from memory is always, to some degree, an edited self. This is not cause for alarm. It is the nature of what selves are. Cognitive scientists now largely accept that the sense of being a continuous, stable person across time is itself a kind of construction. The brain integrates memories, predicts the future, narrates the present, and maintains a thread of identity through all of it, using processes that are as creative as they are archival. You are, in a very precise sense, a story your brain has been telling and editing over the course of your entire life. The editing has a direction. Psychologist Timothy Wilson and colleagues have studied what they call the psychological immune system, the suite of unconscious processes by which the mind protects itself from devastating blows to well-being. Memory editing is one of its primary tools. When people experience loss, failure, or rejection, the mind gradually, over hours, days, and many nights, works to incorporate the experience into a self-narrative that preserves basic functioning. The event is not denied, but its meaning is quietly renegotiated. Its position in the larger story is shifted. It becomes something the self survived, rather than something that defines the self. The renegotiation of meaning during sleep has been observed in studies of emotional memory consolidation over multiple nights. When participants are tested on emotional memories immediately after encoding, they show full emotional intensity. After one night of sleep, the emotional charge begins to reduce. After several nights, the reduction is measurable and consistent. The memory does not disappear. The emotion associated with it diminishes. What remains is what researchers call the semantic memory trace. The meaning, the lesson, the story, without the full physiological and emotional weight of the original experience. What the brain carries forward is the understanding, lighter than the original feeling that produced it. This process, the gradual decoupling of meaning from distress, may be one of the most consequential things sleep does for psychological health. Researchers have proposed that this is why inadequate sleep is so strongly associated with emotional dysregulation. When the brain does not complete enough slow wave and REM sleep cycles, the decoupling process is interrupted. Emotional memories retain their charge. The events of yesterday feel as raw as they did when they happened. The memory system has not yet had time to process them into the softer, more manageable form that healthy sleep produces. The past remains present. The softening is not neutral. It has a preferred direction. Studies of the emotional valence of memories across time have found that the brain is not simply reducing intensity uniformly. It is reducing negative intensity more than positive intensity. Memories of joyful events retain more of their emotional warmth than memories of painful events retain their sting. This asymmetry has been found across cultures and age groups. It appears to be a stable feature of the human memory system. The brain is not objective in its editing. It is editing toward survival, toward the continuation of a self that can experience future joy. The brain's optimistic editing has been studied in the context of aging. Older adults show a consistent pattern called the positivity effect. They preferentially attend to, encode, and remember positive information compared to younger adults. Early interpretations assumed this reflected cognitive decline. Later research suggested something different. Older adults may be actively deploying attentional and memory strategies that prioritize emotional meaning and well-being. The positivity effect was strongest in adults who reported high well-being, suggesting it was a skill rather than a limitation. The brain, over a lifetime of practice, learns to edit with greater care. The relationship between sleep, memory, and well-being runs deeper than consolidation. Sleep affects the very encoding of new memories, how well they form in the first place. Sleep deprivation impairs hippocampal function, reducing the brain's ability to form new episodic memories by a measurable degree. People who are sleep deprived are not just worse at remembering what happened the next day. They form weaker memory traces in the first place. Traces more vulnerable to distortion, more susceptible to interference, and less likely to be successfully consolidated. Poor sleep makes the memory system more likely to produce false memories, not less. The connection between sleep and memory accuracy has implications for understanding emotional distress and memory distortion. People under chronic stress tend to sleep poorly. People who sleep poorly form weaker memories and are more vulnerable to false memory formation. People who form distorted memories of stressful events may construct narratives that maintain or amplify their distress, which then disrupts sleep further. There is a self-reinforcing loop here, one that connects the biology of sleep, the mechanics of memory, and the experience of suffering. Breaking the loop, researchers suggest, often begins with sleep. The most accessible entry point may be the most biological one: rest. Dream content offers another window into the brain's overnight editorial work. Researchers have found that the emotional themes of dreams tend to mirror the emotional concerns of waking life, with a delay. Studies by Rosalind Cartwright found that divorce-related emotional themes appeared in dreams in the weeks following a separation, and that people whose dreams showed active processing of the emotional material, incorporating new narrative perspectives, finding resolution, showed better psychological adjustment. Months later, the brain was using dreaming to workshop the difficult material. It was trying out versions of the story until it found one that fit. The dreaming mind has a particular gift for recombination. During REM sleep, the brain combines elements from different memories and experiences in novel ways. Connections that the waking mind, operating in more constrained and goal-directed modes, might never make. Research by Ulrich Wagner and colleagues found that people were significantly more likely to have sudden insight into a mathematical problem after sleeping on it than after an equivalent period of awake rest. Sleep was not just consolidating what was already known, it was generating new connections. Some of what we call intuition or insight may be the residue of the recombinant work the brain performs while we sleep. The recombinant work of sleep is relevant to false memory formation. When the brain combines elements from different memories in dream, the resulting combinations may be consolidated as experiences rather than constructions. A dream in which two real events are blended, because both share the same emotional theme, may leave a memory trace that later presents as a single event, incorporating elements of both. The brain has not failed at source monitoring. It has used dream state recombination to find meaning that neither event alone provided, then encoded the product as experience. It has built a slightly richer past than the raw facts provided. This building function extends to how the brain handles memories of significant relationships. Studies of memory for social interactions have found consistent, constructive tendencies. People remember conversations as more harmonious than recordings show them to have been. They remember the people they love as more supportive than event-by-event accounts confirm. They remember conflicts as having been resolved more cleanly than they were. These constructive tendencies are stronger in people who rate their relationships as more important to them. The brain is protecting what it values by building more sustaining memories than the raw data provided. The protection of valued relationships through memory construction may be adaptive. Research on relationship satisfaction has found that people who hold slightly idealized views of their partners, who remember positive interactions more vividly, and attribute negative interactions to circumstances rather than character, tend to have more stable and satisfying long-term relationships. The idealization is calibrated, not blind. It preserves the emotional foundation while allowing the relationship to endure the inevitable damage that real intimacy produces. The brain edits toward connection, toward the version of the relationship that can continue. The editing toward connection extends to memory of the self in relation to others. Studies of autobiographical memory in the context of attachment have found that people with secure attachment styles, those who experienced consistent, responsive caregiving early in life, show better, integrated, more coherent autobiographical narratives. People with anxious or avoidant attachment show more fragmented or distorted narratives, either overwhelmed with emotional detail or strikingly sparse and decontextualized. The quality of early relational experience shapes not just the content of memory, but the quality of its narrative organization. The brain learns to remember in the style of how it was cared for. This connection between early care and memory organization has significant implications for understanding why false memories vary between people. People who experienced early environments that were safe, predictable, and responsive tend to form more coherent, less distorted memories. People who experienced unpredictable, threatening, or neglectful early environments tend to form memories with more gaps, more fragmentation, and more vulnerability to distortion. The brain's editing function was shaped early by what it needed to do to survive. The way the brain tells its stories was itself a kind of learning, one that happened in rooms and silences that taught the nervous system what to expect from the world. Understanding these patterns is not the same as being trapped by them. Research on post-traumatic growth, the positive psychological change that can follow significant adversity, has found that one of its most consistent features is narrative transformation. People who experience growth after trauma tend, over time, to construct new accounts of what happened. Accounts that place the experience inside a meaningful life story, rather than as an interruption to it. This transformation is associated with changed memory. The events are remembered differently, not because the facts changed, but because their meaning in the larger story shifted. The past was edited into something survivable. The malleability of memory is both its vulnerability and its gift. The same properties that make memory susceptible to misinformation and false construction also make it responsive to therapy, growth, and healing. Because memories are not fixed, because they reconsolidate with each recall, because sleep continues to process them, because narrative reshapes meaning. It is possible, with time, to remember difficult things differently, not to erase them, not to pretend they didn't happen, but to remember them from a different position in the story, to carry them with less weight. This is not forgetting. It is, in a specific and meaningful sense, healing. The brain's tolerance for a certain amount of false memory may be, paradoxically, what makes healing possible. If memory were truly fixed, if every experience were encoded with perfect fidelity and retrievable exactly as it was stored, then the past could not be processed. Difficult events would remain forever as sharp and present as the day they happened. The plasticity of memory, its willingness to be rebuilt, its capacity to be edited by sleep and time and narrative is what allows the past to become, gradually, the past to recede to a manageable distance, to become something that happened, rather than something that is always happening. Neuroscientist Daniel Schachter, who has spent decades cataloging what he calls the 7 sins of memory, including transience, misattribution, and suggestibility, has suggested that these apparent flaws are better understood as side effects of features. Memory's suggestibility is a side effect of its adaptability. Memory's transience is a side effect of its tendency to prioritize relevance over completeness. The brain does not preserve everything, because preserving everything would make it harder to navigate a world that keeps changing. The editing is not failure. It is the cost of being alive to the present moment. What the brain releases is as deliberate as what it keeps. Being alive to the present moment is, in part, what memory is for. Psychologists who study prospective memory, the system that allows us to plan and anticipate the future, have found that it shares significant neural machinery with episodic memory, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the default mode network. These regions are active both when we remember the past and when we imagine the future. Memory and imagination are not separate faculties. They are 2 uses of the same constructive system. What the brain builds when remembering and what it builds when imagining are products of the same generative process. This integration of memory and imagination in a single constructive system has profound implications for understanding false memories. When the brain generates a false memory, completing a pattern, filling a gap, building a narrative, it is using the same machinery it uses to plan tomorrow, to imagine a better outcome, to envision a path forward. False memories are not intrusions from a failed recording system. They are products of the very system that makes it possible to learn from the past and prepare for the future. They are imagination applied to the past. And imagination is not a flaw in human cognition. It is its most significant feature. The constructive nature of memory has been embraced in the emerging field of memory reconsolidation therapy. This approach deliberately triggers the reconsolidation window, the brief period after recall in which a memory is vulnerable to update, and introduces new information designed to shift the emotional core. Early clinical results have been promising for treating phobias, addictions, and trauma-related conditions. The therapy does not ask the brain to forget. It asks it to remember differently, to consolidate a slightly altered version, one in which the threat carries less overwhelming charge. It asks the brain to do consciously what it does naturally. Every night, while you sleep, the ethics of deliberately altering memory have generated significant debate among neuroscientists and philosophers. Some argue that accurate memory is fundamental to identity, autonomy, and moral responsibility, that a person whose memories have been altered, even therapeutically, has had something essential taken from them. Others argue that the brain is already doing this naturally, that the past is already not fixed, and that the question is not whether memories should be altered, but whether alterations should be intentional and healing rather than accidental and harmful. The debate is not resolved. It may never be, but it is asking the right questions about what memory is for. For the purposes of tonight, for the mind that has been following this for nearly an hour, the debate resolves into something quieter. You have memories that are not perfectly accurate. Some were softened while you slept. Some were completed by the brain's pattern recognition in ways that added detail you didn't directly experience. Some were edited to protect a relationship, a self-concept, or a sense of continuity. You are carrying a past that was partly built for your survival, and you are still here. The building worked. The story being partly constructed does not make it less yours. It makes it evidence of a mind that kept working. The brain does not create false memories because it is broken. It creates them because it is doing what it was built to do. Protect the self. Sustain the story. Soften what is unbearable. Find meaning in what resists. False memory is not betrayal of reality. It is the brain's most compassionate response to it. The response of a system that learned over evolutionary time that survival depends not on perfect accuracy, but on the capacity to continue. The remaining facts carry a different quality. They are not building toward the answer. They are resting inside it. What is left is the feeling of what that means. Breathe slowly now. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is beneath you. The parts of you that have been carrying edited stories the night helped build to keep you moving, have been doing that work for as long as you've been alive, longer than you have been aware of them doing it. There is nothing to fix about that. There is nothing to unravel. The brain that edits is the brain that kept you. Let it rest now. As you are resting, we'll continue gently. Memory is not a record. It is a relationship between who you were and who you are now, shaped by everything that has happened in between. Every memory you hold has been touched by sleep, by time, by the brain's ongoing need to make a story it can carry. That touching is not contamination. It is the evidence of a mind that kept working on your behalf. The mind that remembers you is the same one that has been quietly repairing you across every night of sleep. The hippocampus is, on average, smaller in people who have experienced prolonged chronic stress. Research has found that the hippocampus may retain some capacity for neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons, into adulthood, though the extent in humans is still being carefully studied. Sleep and rest appear to support this process. The brain can, over time, rebuild some of what stress cost it. The architecture of memory is not fixed at the point of injury. Something new can grow in the space. Forgetting is not failure. The brain forgets deliberately, pruning connections that are no longer useful, clearing space for new experience. What you cannot remember tonight may not be lost. It may have been assessed as no longer essential to the story you are living now. Researchers call this adaptive forgetting. The brain edits forward as well as backward. The letting go is part of what makes room for what is coming. Every night of sleep is partly a night of gentle release. The stories we tell about our memories shape the memories themselves. When you describe an experience to someone, The act of narrating it shifts its neural encoding slightly. It becomes a little more like the story you told than like what was originally encoded. Every telling is an editing. Sharing a memory with someone you trust is, in a small way, letting someone else into the workshop of the mind. What we choose to share, and to whom, quietly shapes what the past becomes. The brain remembers the emotional tone of a place long after it has forgotten the specific events that occurred there. You may not remember what was said, or when, or with whom, and yet, certain rooms, certain hours of day, certain kinds of light carry a feeling that belongs to something. The feeling is the memory. The rest was context. The emotional residue of an experience outlasts its details by years, which is why a particular quality of afternoon light can carry you somewhere the facts no longer reach. Sleep-dependent memory consolidation is most active in the early morning hours, when REM sleep is longest and most complex. The dreams of early morning, the ones that feel most vivid, most emotionally dense, occur during the peak period of overnight memory processing. What you remember from dreams upon waking is a small fraction of what the brain was processing. The rest was done quietly, in the dark, without needing to surface into awareness. The most significant work of the night happens just before dawn. In dreams, you will not remember. Children show higher rates of false memory formation than adults in some paradigms, possibly because their source monitoring systems are still developing, but they also show faster emotional recovery from difficult experiences in some contexts. A system that edits more freely may also heal more quickly. The full weight of accurate memory is something the developing brain grows into gradually. As the self becomes sturdy enough to hold it, children live, perhaps, in a closer relationship with the brain's editing function, held, not protected from reality, but carried through it. Emotional memories that have been well processed, consolidated across many nights, integrated into a coherent narrative, tend to feel less urgent than freshly encoded ones. The past, given enough sleep and enough time, becomes something that happened rather than something that is happening. The distance is not forgetting. It is the brain having completed its work. What feels urgent tonight may feel simply true in a year. The urgency of a memory is often a signal of how much processing remains. The brain's editorial work does not require your participation or permission. It happens while you are unconscious, while you are, in the most literal sense, unable to interfere with the process. There is something genuinely restful in that. The system does not need you to understand what it is doing, or direct it, or approve. It only needs you to sleep, and it will do the rest. The most helpful thing you can offer is simply the conditions for rest. The false memory that protects you is not a lie. It is the brain's best attempt at a truth you could survive. There is a difference. Not everything the mind builds is accurate, but everything the mind builds with care is true in some direction that matters. The direction of continuing, of finding meaning, of waking up tomorrow with enough story intact to keep going. What the brain constructs for your survival is the oldest form of care it knows how to offer. The brain is doing this for you right now. As your breathing slows and the thoughts thin, and whatever remains of the day loses its urgency, the hippocampus is beginning its slow, quiet replay. The memories of today are being sorted. Some will be kept. Some will be gently edited. Some will be released. You don't need to know which is which. The system knows. Tonight is already becoming memory, being shaped into something you can carry forward. People who sleep well do not simply feel better the next day. They remember the previous day more accurately in its emotional essentials, more able to distinguish what genuinely matters from what felt urgent in the moment. Sleep is not just recovery. It is perspective. The morning after good sleep is a morning in which the story makes a little more sense than it did the night before. What felt impossible the night before often becomes simply difficult by morning. The word remember comes from the Latin rememorare, to call back to mind. But the calling back is always a calling into the present. Memory is not retrieval of the past. It is the past entering the present in the form of the brain's current understanding. What you remember is already being shaped by who you are now. The past is never quite fixed. It is always arriving freshly, carrying what the present needs from it. Every memory you reach for tonight comes filtered through everything that has happened since. The brain that creates false memories is the same brain that finds beauty, that loves, that plans for a future it has not yet lived. It is not a separate malfunction operating alongside the good parts. It is the same tissue, the same impulse, the same generative creativity applied to the past instead of the future. What makes you imaginative also makes you occasionally wrong about what happened. That is not a problem to be solved. It is the nature of being a mind that reaches. There is a kind of courage in this, in trusting a mind that you know edits its own history, in continuing to form memories, knowing they will be touched by sleep and time, and the brain's need for coherence, in building a self from material that is partly constructed. Most of the selves you have ever known were built the same way. The self you are continuing to build tonight is not less real for being partly made. To know the brain edits and to go on trusting it is something closer to faith. The body holds memory too, not only in the brain. Stress responses can be encoded in the body, in muscle tension, in breathing patterns, in the way the nervous system responds to certain kinds of stimulation. Sleep helps process these embodied memories alongside the neural ones. As your body grows heavier and softer in the dark, it is doing its own quiet version of what the brain is doing above it. Releasing, adjusting, setting down what it can. The body, like the brain, does its editing in rest. The sleep that comes tonight will do what it does without announcement, without ceremony, without requiring that you understand the mechanisms. The hippocampus doesn't ask your permission before it replays the day. The amygdala doesn't consult you before it begins to lower its chemistry. The brain simply begins, and in the beginning, the editing starts. And in the editing, the past becomes slightly more bearable, and the future becomes slightly more possible. All of this will happen tonight in the quiet. One of the most quietly remarkable findings in memory research. People told that their memories may be inaccurate do not lose trust in themselves. They adjust. They learn to hold memories with a lighter grip, trusting them while knowing they are not perfect. This is associated with better psychological flexibility and lower rates of depressive rumination. Knowing the brain edits does not make the self less solid. It makes the self more honest and more free. The loosened grip is not a loss. It may be what it feels like when the self stops defending what it never needed to defend. The mind you are resting in tonight has been working in your service for longer than you can remember. It formed its first memories before you had language to hold them. It has been editing and consolidating and building across every sleep you have ever had. It has made mistakes. It has smoothed things that perhaps should have stayed sharp. It has built versions of events easier to carry than what occurred. All of this with the single purpose of keeping you here, and here you are. Every night of sleep was a night the brain returned to its work. False memories are the brain's form of mercy. Not mercy as softness or weakness, but mercy as the willingness to do what is necessary, to build what must be built, to hold what must be held, to let go of what must be released. The brain does not ask whether the mercy is deserved. It simply offers it every night, in the dark, while you sleep. Mercy offered without waiting to be asked, without needing credit. That is the kind of mercy that has been keeping you. Tonight is one of those nights. The brain is already beginning its quiet work. The day is already becoming something it can process. Less urgent, more shaped, more like a story, and less like a crisis. Let it do what it does. There is nothing required of you now, except to continue breathing and to allow what the night does to happen. Gently, without interference. The willingness to simply breathe and let the system work is all that is needed. The parts of you that doubt your own mind, that fear you cannot trust what you remember, are carrying something real. Memory is uncertain. The brain does edit, but doubt is not the right response to that uncertainty. The right response may be something closer to gratitude, that the mind works so hard, that it cares enough to build, that it spends the dark hours making what it can from what you gave it. The mind that doubts itself has never stopped building. You are not at the mercy of a broken machine. You are carried by a generous one that has been quietly on your side since before you knew there were sides. One that finds, in every night's sleep, another opportunity to make the past slightly more livable and the future slightly more possible. That is what it has been doing for you, without credit, across every night of your life. It has simply kept running, in the dark, toward the single goal of keeping you going. The science has shown us the mechanism, the hippocampal replay, the REM state emotional processing, the reconsolidation window, the narrative completion. What the mechanism is for is simpler than the mechanism itself. The brain builds what you need in order to continue. It has been doing this your entire life, through every difficult season, in every night of sleep. Tonight, quietly, it will do it again. The mechanism is in service of something much simpler than itself. The continuation of a self that matters to the mind that carries it. The answer is not that false memories are errors the brain should correct. It is that the brain was never trying to be a recorder. It was always trying to be a companion, one that stays with you, edits toward your survival, builds the story you need to keep going. The mind that sometimes gets the details wrong has never once forgotten that you matter. Not in any version of the story, not in any edit, not in any night. Something is already different from when you started. The question that opened tonight, why the subconscious creates false memories, has moved from the head to somewhere quieter. There was no single false memory studied here. There was the brain's whole relationship with the past. Editorial, compassionate, imperfect, and fiercely in service of the self that needs to keep living. The norepinephrine in your brain is lower now than it was an hour ago. The hippocampus has already begun its work. What you brought tonight will be sorted, and some of it will be built into something slightly more livable by morning. That is not a corruption of the truth. It is the brain's oldest form of care. The Sleepy Psychology Facts playlist has been tracing the architecture of the mind across many hours. The next video follows it further, toward the question of what the sleeping brain does when the story it needs to build is about who you might become. That video is waiting whenever you are ready. The editing is already happening. Let your body grow heavy, the way it knows how to do without instruction. If sleep comes, it carries you into the part where the work continues without you, where the day is quietly made into something you can hold tomorrow. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well, gentle mind. The version of tonight that you will carry is already being chosen, and it is being chosen in your favor. Where curiosity ends and sleep begins. Good night.